Ladies and gentlemen, what happened to civility? When did we lose it? Did we ever have it? How are we going to find it and successfully implement civility again for the common good? We're going to talk about this today. My name is Frank Zaccari, and this is Life Altering Events. I'm going to talk about returning to civility. There's no denying that we live in a divided world. Very strong opinions, harsh words, misrepresentation of facts, outright lies have become commonplace. Civil discourse, discussion, and debate has been replaced by name-calling, hostile rhetoric, and now acts of violence. What happened? And more importantly, how do we get it back? My guest today is Sejal Thakker, and she is an attorney, and she is the Chief Civility Officer. Wasn't that a great title? Chief Civility Officer. Her focus is on delivering specifically tailored employment law and human resource training for employers on a variety of topics, including harassment, bullying, discrimination, unconscious bias, which we're going to go into in some depth here, diversity, inclusion, and leadership training. So Sejal, welcome to Life Altering Events.
Thank you, Frank. I've been thinking about this conversation since yesterday, so I'm excited for this. Thank you so much for having me here.
It's our pleasure. Tell us your early experiences. You're a first generation American. You migrated, your parents migrated. Tell us what that experience was like.
Yeah, like a lot of immigrants, my parents left everything. Well, they came from India, so they left everything they knew in India. They moved here in 1974. And this is a cool little fun fact about me, Frank, that not a lot of people know. I actually was conceived in India and born here. So talk about being that marginal person, right? I think my picture needs to be next to that word in the dictionary, but I'm as marginal as it comes. So when they came here, they barely knew any English, and they were sponsored because my mom's sister's husband was an engineer, and so he got a visa and he was able to bring my family into the country. And so right away they just started working. When I grew up, it was tough. At that time, a lot of immigrants. Families didn't have a lot of support into how to kind of assimilate into the culture. And as me growing up, I was expected to be one way at home, be part of that Indian traditional culture because my parents just got here. And then I was also American and wanted to be part of the American culture. And so I really kind of walked that fine line between the two cultures, trying to maintain both. And so that was a little rough. And then my parents, where I grew up the most, was in a small town called Elmwood Park in Chicago, predominantly Italian neighborhoods. And we were the only Indian family there. So I started experiencing harassment, discrimination, bullying at a young age. And so I was dealing with both the marginality of the dual cultures as well as harassment coming in from people who, viewed me as being different from them. So growing up was difficult. A lot of the work that I do now, Frank, is because of those experiences that I've gone through. And I use those as tools or stories that I share to kind of help other people see different perspectives on things.
Well, for all the Italian Americans in the United States, I apologize for that behavior. That is something that's completely intolerable, particularly given that the Italians were the last of the Western Europeans to come. And we went through the same thing. No excuse for that. None, zero.
Yeah.
So you went through school in the Chicago area. Tell us about where you went to college and how you became an attorney.
Yeah, so I knew I was going to be an attorney very young. I think I was around 8 or 9 when my dad said, he told me, it sounds so cliche, right? Or corny, but it's true. He told me I was going to be a lawyer because I just asked why all the time. Like that was, I know most kids ask why a lot because they're curious, but I guess I was that like annoying person that asked why way too much. So I knew I was going to be an attorney at a young age. I went to undergraduate school in actual downtown Chicago at a University of Illinois at Chicago. And then I graduated from law school from Northern Illinois. And I graduated and I moved to the Bay Area. And I've been in California since 2000. And I don't miss those cold winters, I'll tell you.
I grew up in Buffalo. I can relate. I look at the news and I say every day, that's why I don't live there.
Exactly, me too. I'm with
That is
you.
that is wild. So moving from Chicago to San Francisco, that's quite a culture shock. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I love it. I love the Bay Area. I mean, Chicago had diversity as well. And specifically where I went to school, we had a lot of diversity both at UIC and there was pretty good diversity at Northern as well. And so for me, culturally, coming to San Francisco was it was like, this is home. I mean, I actually moved to San Diego. So I'm in South San Francisco now, but I was in the San Francisco Bay Area from 2000 till about 8 years ago, not 8 years ago, sorry, about 2010. And then I moved to San Diego for 4 years and I missed the Bay Area way too much. So I moved back because the diversity is something that, I have an 8-year-old. I want to raise my son around diversity. So you have to be very intentional about what we're exposing our children to. And so when I was in San Diego and I love it, and maybe someday I'll move back because I love the weather there and it's a great place to live. But for the diversity fact alone, I want to be in the Bay Area. There's just so much beautiful diversity here. One of the things that we like to do often together is San Francisco has these day festivals with different
Yes.
cultural, and I just take him to these and we'll just go spend the day out there and I'm all about immersing him into different cultures so he can learn and be exposed to
San
all.
Francisco is a tremendous. I lived up in that area for 25 plus years, and I just moved to San Diego. But the San Francisco, there's no place like it for inclusion. It's one of the best places in the world for that. Now you were a litigator, so were you litigating EEOC type claims?
So I started off and when I first got out of law school, I actually was doing workers' compensation law. And that's just where I got into it right away. And I realized that that wasn't the right fit for me. But while I was doing workers' compensation law, I got exposed to cases where people felt like they had been discriminated against because they filed a workers' compensation claim. That
Hmm.
started to pique my interest because I was like, okay, now this is going more into that discrimination area or that harassment area. That's where I really wanted to be. So that sort of opened up my eyes and I expanded to civil litigation. And for most of my career, Frank, I worked on cases that dealt with sexual harassment, any kind of harassment dealing with race, gender, any of your protected categories. I dealt with a lot of discrimination cases. And then I also had a huge chunk of cases that dealt with retaliation. But
Mm,
here's the kind of twist in that whole story, because I actually went from being the person that was being harassed and bullied, and then I ended up being a defense attorney. So now I was representing people who had been accused of doing that to other people. So that was a real big twist in my story because you would have probably imagined that it might have gone the other way, that I would have been
yeah.
fighting for the underdog, right? But mine went the other way. And it's pretty significant, that twist, because that really goes into a topic that I know we want to focus in on today, unconscious bias. And I'll talk
Hmm.
about more of that when we get to there. That twist is important to that story.
That is incredible. I would have never dreamed you would be on the defense side, but you probably got exposed to a whole lot of issues that really do need to be addressed. Now let's go right into this. You morphed from a litigator into a trainer. How did that occur?
So I was a litigator all the way up until 8 years ago. So that's where I was representing managers in those cases. And what I found was that I knew that litigation or being an attorney, a defense, a litigator wasn't the right fit for me yet, because I'm more of a conflict resolution person. So I was spending way too much time trying to resolve these lawsuits rather than actually litigate the lawsuit, right? And in that process, I would use those opportunities to educate people about, what they should have done or maybe what they shouldn't have done, or, just kind of educate people. And that was really where I found my passion, where I felt like I was able to take difficult concepts, break them down in a layman's terms, explain it to people, help them understand it, and resolve conflict and let's move forward kind of situation. So when my son was born 8 years ago, I left working at law firms. I wanted to be at home with my son. So for about 3.5 years, I worked from home. I did a lot of teaching. I signed up with several universities. I was teaching on employment law issues, on social justice issues. And then I also started doing a lot of workplace investigations. So got to see companies from a nuts and bolts perspective of what they were doing and how they were running things. And then I just, again, going back to that passion I had, really wanted to do more training. So when he got a little bit older, I went to work for UCSF Medical School here in San Francisco. And there I just focused on investigations pretty much the entire time. I did a little bit of training, but a lot of investigative work. And then something happened, I had a birthday. All right. And I hit this specific number, and something went off inside of me. And I was like, you know what? I really feel passionate about educating people. I really think we can do better work. We can impact better, have a bigger impact, and make workplaces better. If I can just get in front of people and do this proactively on some of these issues that I've learned along the way, what I think is important, what works. And so 3 years ago, I started up my own company called Train Extra, and I just started focusing in. Right now, it's 100% virtual, but I do training all over the world on a lot of different issues that we'll talk about today.
Wow, that's quite a move from litigator to defense to investigation to trainer. That's amazing. When I was in the corporate world, when we started mandatory compliance training somewhere in the 70s and roughly in that range, and it was not well received, to say the least. I heard terms like, why are you wasting our time with this? I'm too busy to deal with this. What's the purpose? Okay. How do you address that?
Yeah, and I hear that all the time still. So that is a regular mentality. And as an attorney, I saw the back end of that, right? I saw people where companies were waiting for the lawsuit. They were waiting for something to happen. They were in denial that they had problems, or they didn't care, or they didn't want to put the money into it, or they didn't want to put the resources in it, whatever the reason was. But I heard that a lot. And then what happened? Then the lawsuit came, and then I got involved. And once that happens, there's no winners. Nobody wins. The employee loses, you lose talent as a company. Nobody wins in those situations. And so it's important to understand that regardless of, what the reason for that why is that that's no longer a nice to have. We are in different times right now, and you need to make culture. There's no way around it. And that's why I can say it so boldly, is that you need to make culture your top priority at your organization, especially if you want good people. Because good people are not putting up with that anymore. The tolerance level has gone down completely. The younger generations are not putting up with it anymore. So if you want to survive, you've got to listen to the issues that are going on, and you got to be proactive in dealing with those situations.
I love that approach, taking more of a positive spin, because when I was coming up and becoming a CEO and senior vice president and what have you, it was always based on negativity. If you harass someone, if you bully someone, if you discriminate someone, there's a multi-million-dollar lawsuit waiting, your career is over. But there was very little underlying cause training. Reasons like, which we'll get into in a great deal of depth here, unconscious bias. Explain what is the power of unconscious bias, and how do you recognize it?
Yeah, so let me just back up a little bit, because I want to give like a full picture of that issue. So what I focus in on is civility, right? And the reason why I take that approach is because I saw a lot of incivility in my career dealing with these lawsuits and dealing with these investigations. So it became very clear to me that we really need to, as organizations, focus on creating culture change, behavioral change, because the people that you have in your organization are going to make up the culture of your organization, right? And there's plenty of research out there that says that the strongest predictor of incivility or of lawsuits or of harassment in your organization is the organization's communication, right? What the climate communicates of what they're going to tolerate, right? So you have to be proactive about it. Now, unconscious bias comes into that picture because when you look at all the different reasons why we have incivility in the workplace, right? Lots of different reasons. I mean, if you just look at the last year, we've had so many reasons why incivility increased. the global pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement, the anti-hate crimes that are going on right now, working remotely. There were so many new issues that have come up this last year. That have been around and they've been around, but I mean, that we've gotten heightened awareness of now, that you start looking at the root cause, like you say, and you say, what is causing the incivility? Well, most of the decisions we make at work or on a daily basis are based on our unconscious thinking, right? So Harvard came out with a study that said our brain processes close to 11 million pieces of information per second through our five senses. So how much of that do you think is consciously processed?
Probably less than a third.
50 pieces.
50.
50 pieces per second.
Wow.
So that means the majority of the decisions, the majority of the behaviors that we're engaging in are basically on autopilot. We're not even aware of the things we're doing, or the assumptions, the impressions that we're making. We're not even aware. It just happens without us even thinking about it. So if it's the majority of what's contributing to your decision making, one of the things I talk about is let's focus on how do we help people understand that how their unconscious thinking, which then results in unconscious bias, right? Which is an important piece to understand, because if you don't know what your unconscious biases are, and bias, by the way, is positive or negative. Bias is not just a bad thing. I think, again, words matter, and the media has made it seem like bias is like associated with, and it is, but it's not the only times, right? Like, just because you have bias doesn't mean you're a racist or a sexist or a bad person. Bias is normal. It's a human, it's the way that our brain works. And so because of that unconscious thinking we were talking about, now you're going to make assumptions about people that are unfamiliar to you, right? You see somebody walk into a room and right away you start making these judgments about that person, right? And that's an evidence, that's an idea of a preference that you have, that we all have. So it's normal. And so, but helping people understand how those kind of thoughts or assumptions you're making, how that might lead to you excluding people at work without even realizing it, right? Because I don't think, and that going back to that twist in that story that I was telling you about earlier, here I was, and became a defense attorney. I was starting to think I was going to see all kinds of malicious, evil people, right? And I did see a few of those, right? I mean, there's always a few bad apples. So, but the majority of the people that I was dealing with were good, were well-intentioned people. They were trying to do their best, but they just were making these judgments, or they were engaging in these habitual patterns without realizing it, right? And so I learned that by educating people, by giving them simple tools to help them start doing the work on their own, to realize what their unconscious thinking is, what is it doing and how it's driving the decisions that they're making, that we can prevent a lot of those from turning into microaggressions, right? So now you've got these preferences, whether they're good or bad, and now you engage in these micro behaviors towards people without even realizing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's going to contribute, now going back to that full circle, that's going to contribute to the incivility in the workplace. So that was a huge piece where I saw as an attorney that organizations weren't spending the resources, the time, the money behind to give effective, not just your one check in the box, let's bring somebody in. I don't care how great of a trainer you are, right? I mean, one time isn't going to do it. It's got to be part of a comprehensive plan. And that should be one big component of that, along with your civility training, right? Along with training people on how to be civil. It's got to be more than just respect in the workplace, right? It's more than that. Let's teach people, because we're all different from each other. At the end of the day, we're all different from each other. We've been raised differently. We've been exposed to different things. Our experiences are different. So that's going to impact how we look at what's okay and what's not okay. Like somebody might say a joke and they're just trying to be funny, but because of my culture or because of my experiences, maybe I don't think that's funny. And so a lot of times the approach has been, don't talk about it. We can't talk about that because that might lead to a harassment complaint or a lawsuit, right? That's been the approach. I've been there. I've done that approach and I know it doesn't work, right? The approach more should be, look, let's not let's not assume that this is a bad person. Let's not make an automatic judgment against them. Let's use this opportunity that when you feel that you're uncomfortable, let's give people the skills, the tools to be able to have that conversation in the right way to say, hey, maybe you were just joking, but I wanted to let you know that that joke, it makes me feel uncomfortable because, and not judge that person, but let them know how you feel, but also point out to them that something that they're doing is making making you feel uncomfortable. Because a lot of times people don't even realize that they're making somebody feel uncomfortable because it's something that's normal to them, right? So we shouldn't be judging that person. Let's give everybody an opportunity and put them on notice, is what I like to say. Let's put them on notice in the right way, and let's communicate with each other. Most people, when you do that, Frank, they're going to stop, right? We're not trying to make people feel uncomfortable or harass them. If you are, we've got a different issue.
Correct.
Those are the few bad apples that I dealt with, right? So, but most people, when you put them on notice in the right way, without judging them, with using it as I like to say, calling them in. We're not calling anybody out, right? It's not this whole let's cancel everybody. It's let's call you in. Let's explain to you why this is making me feel that way, and do it in the right way. And so again, back to that first question you asked me about why organizations need to make this stuff a priority is because the only way you can create civility in the workplace, if that's what you're striving for, is the only way is by creating a culture of psychological safety, right? Where people can have these conversations. So if you don't create that, people are not going to have these conversations. And then the only time they're going to find out is when the lawsuit is filed. And now it's too late. So it all kind of comes back together. So, your unconscious bias training has to be a big part of that. Your civility training has to be a big part of that. You have to have adequate diversity and inclusion training, right? Where people can have these deeper dialogues, these deeper conversations about issues like privilege, like white supremacy, why people need to get educated on it. It's not about blaming you or calling you out, but it's about educating. I mean, look, I'll be honest, I've always been a social advocate person, but I have learned so much in just the last year that I'm like, why didn't I know this stuff before? Because I have thrown myself into it and I am learning about it. And I've been in this space for a long time, right? So if you haven't been in this space, it's going to take some time, and we need to meet people where they're at, right? And not feel like we're going to just try to shove this down your throat. That approach doesn't work, right? We can't use fear or shaming or judging people to kind of motivate people. And so all of that these are all components that need to be looked at. And I'll be honest, I'm not seeing that a lot. I'm seeing it more now than I did before, but I still see, and again, I want to give credit to the companies that are really doing the work, because there are companies that are there, but not enough. We need more companies to get into this game right now so that we can make a big impact and we can actually, be ready for what's coming, because our future generations, these younger generations, are not going to put up with it. And so things have to change so we stay ahead of it. Unlike, let's, not get ahead of it, and then you're just not going to make it. You're not going to survive.
Absolutely. One of the things I saw a great deal coming up, and I'm a lot older than you are, was this fire hose training, which hasn't really seemed to change. I'm going to send you away for 2 days, a week, whatever it is. We're going to bombard you. We're going to send you back with manuals, which you're going to throw in the corner and never open up again, ever, right? So I worked with other organizations I worked for, and that I tried to do in my CEO life was every quarter we're going to have something.
Yeah.
So it was a reinforced, and we didn't give them 500 manuals. It was, we're going to talk about X today, and then we're going to follow up on it. And then the next quarter, we're going to talk about X and then how it plays into the next step. Is that what you do? Is that what you encourage people to have? Is that ongoing thing?
Absolutely. And look, and I'll even tell you, like prior to COVID, I was doing all on in-person training, because that's just where I like to be. I like to be in that space. I like to be in a classroom. And then ever since COVID, I've obviously, like most people, I've pivoted, and now I do everything online. And I'll tell you, like, where I think is a very important thing that I've learned myself this past year is that it's very important for organizations to have a solid combination of live trainers, of in-person trainers, whether you do it in person or virtual, but having somebody live makes a huge difference. But also, I think you need to have a robust plan that does allow for the online, the short bursts of training, the every couple of days, let's send you an article or something that's continuous to reinforce these concepts and behaviors. So I think you need to look at it from a very much a comprehensive approach of in-person, virtual, online trainings, scenario-based, incorporating like the tougher issues that are coming up that are present right now. Like, for example, there's a huge thing going on right now where women are leaving the workforce at a rate we've never seen before. So this is creating a lot of incivility in organizations because a lot of the gender bias issues are coming up, and so we know this, everybody knows this. And my question is, what is your organization doing about that? Are you just saying it's going to pass? Now you've lost a whole bunch of women and valuable talent. All the work we've done for the last 10 years in gender equality is going to go down the drain if organizations don't do something to keep women into the workforce, right? Especially Black women and women of color are the ones that, Latina women are struggling the most because they're likely to be the breadwinner in their family, or they have a significant spouse that's outside of the home. So every company I'm talking to right now, I'm like, what are you doing, by the way, on this issue? Because you can't just ignore the realities of what's going on, right? So you can use that sort of burst of education, and sending out a video to everybody to say, hey, we just want to make sure that, we're doing something about this, and keeping people in the loop about there's these issues that are going on. Yeah, they might be going on, like the increase in Asian hate crimes, and I was going to comment on this because you said earlier that the Bay Area is one of the most diverse, and it's a wonderful place. I'm living here, but we've seen a huge increase in Asian hate crimes
Yes.
in our neighborhoods, and it's not okay, and so I'm talking to organizations and I'm saying, that's going on out there. What are you doing about it inside your company? Because these are the people that are going to be going out there. So if you've got a large Asian workforce, you got to support those employees, and you got to train, educate people on how to not be bystanders when they see something like this going on. Like, what do you do if you're standing outside and somebody starts beating up on an old Asian person? Like, you got to do something. You can't just stand there, right? So take this time to use those moments as teaching moments within your organization, because these are the people that are going to go out there. So training is just, obviously you can tell I'm passionate
Very
about
passionate.
this, right?
Very passionate. Here's something that I ran into with some organizations that I was working with. They would say, hey, Frank, all this stuff is wonderful, and it's curing cancer and feeding the homeless and all that kind of stuff. And when business was good, fine. But now we're in COVID and we're struggling. I don't have time for this anymore. And I would say, almost like you said, now you have time.
Mm-hmm.
So use this time to start to look inwardly at what it is that's going on here.
Yes.
It appeared to me that we were making progress in civility. It not great progress, but it appeared we were making some. And then the last 5 to 7 years, it's sort of fallen off the cliff. Okay. What do you think happened, and what things do corporate executives have to know?
I would say, from just my own experiences, that I think that we started getting more serious about incivility when the Me Too movement happened. I think that kind of, to me, is like it stands out to me, and it could just be because of that's where I got really heavily involved into it, right? Because the Me Too movement happened in October of 2017, and I started my business just a month later. So I was really on the tail of all of that stuff that was going on, and then in my career, I've worked on a lot of sexual harassment. That was the area that I ended up working on the most. So it was a very interesting area. I was staying on top of what was going on. And so I think that's where we started seeing companies really taking a deeper look at, why are we having incivility? Then there was a report that came out. And again, this is going back to, how do we prevent incivility from the workplace? The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission came out with the report. They had a task force where they looked at what companies were doing, and they came out with this report in June of 2016, that was like over 100 pages long, and it really broke down like what companies had been doing, why it hadn't worked, what they should be doing. So I think after that report came out, again, we started seeing companies start paying more attention to what was going on within their organizations and look at how they can make a bigger impact. Last year, though, flipped us all back, right?
Yes.
I mean, we saw incivility in, again, so many different ways. I remember doing a podcast, Frank, like right when the pandemic hit. So this was like early April. Right where we're in the heel of the lockdown. I remember, and I did a podcast with my friend Summer Watson, and she and I were talking about an increase. It's not ironic. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but I'm doing the same conversation with you right now, and I'm still talking about Asian hate crimes because in her podcast, I talked about how there had been an increase in Asian hate crimes because of what the prior administration, what the president was making those comments,
Yes.
and that was creating more. And look at that, a year later, we're still dealing with that same exact issue right now. Maybe not
Hmm.
for that specific reason, but so the global pandemic, when I did that podcast, I feel like I predicted that the Black Lives Matter movement was going to happen because I said this is going to bring out the worst in people and this is going to bring out the best in people. And then the incivility started. Black Lives Matter movement, the civil rights movement started. That continued on. The pandemic went on way longer than we were expecting, and now women are leaving the workforce. That was creating, people were isolated at home. They didn't have any social contact. I mean, we're wired for human connection, and now we're all locked up at home. Some of us don't like our home. Some of it, homeschooling. People were just tested in so many different ways that was creating an increase in incivility. Plus the fact that we're working remotely, a lot of people are working from home. So it's, sometimes you get more courage when you're behind a screen and you're more likely to be short or say something you might regret later on that you might not say to somebody in person. So we saw a lot of cyber bullying, cyber issues coming up in ways we've never seen before, stuff on social media that was happening, that was creating incivility. Now you're going online and you're posting about your coworkers and the things going viral. And we saw lots of CEOs get canned because they were out there doing things, and then social media is a tool. So social media has actually helped us a lot. I mean, that's not helped us, but technology has helped a lot too, just like the Me Too movement. The fact that now that we have technology and people are feeling more comfortable about speaking up about situations. Again, another major reason why companies need to make sure they're not tolerating it, because it could go off and be a viral thing, and now your organization's under a microscope, right? So,
Exactly.
yeah, lots of things have happened over the last
Exactly.
year.
One of the things that over the course of the past year is I've heard people saying, "Oh, geez, Frank, we got the Black Lives Matter, we got an Asian thing, we got the Native Americans." So everybody's upset. Everybody's upset. How do I address it? And you posted an article, I think today, that is a new term, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color. I love that because now we're not marginalizing, fractionalizing this. Why is that important?
It's so important, Frank, and that's why I posted the article. I mean, look, I want to, first of all, I want to say anybody that's watching this, get that article, get it off my website, Frank. I don't know if you can attach it because
I will.
I put it up there because I'm hearing this a lot everywhere. But basically, you need to read this article, okay? Because what is important to understand is that words matter, right? Our words matter, and a lot of people think that. Wait a second, you're telling me words matter, but every day there's a new word for something, or we're recharacterizing, or we're saying that's not okay. And I've been doing this a long time, and there's just a lot of excuses going on. But I want people to realize that instead of making these excuses, look at it like we are growing. We are growing when we are finally recognizing that by using a certain word, we are discounting experiences of other groups. That's not a negative thing. That's a positive thing. That's understanding that, wait a second, we can't just lump everybody that's brown together, because every person has gone through, this group has gone through different experiences, and we have to acknowledge that. And until we acknowledge that, we can't then solve that problem, right? If we just say it's one big thing, right? Like right now, I'm doing a lot of advocacy work with this whole model minority myth stereotype, right? That people have of Asians. You're smarter, you're hardworking, you're quieter. And it's a positive stereotype. but there is a lot of harm that comes from that. And so again, words matter. And so I'm out there trying to educate Asians, and specifically South Asians, on don't just think that this stereotype benefits you. You have to understand it and acknowledge it to really do the work to how do you mitigate that? How do you then be an ally if you're not understanding what these words mean? So that article that I posted about BIPOC and people of color does a really good job at explaining why our words matter, and that when you mislabel somebody, why that's important. And I think you need to read that perspective and understand the different perspectives, because until you understand where that perspective is coming from, you can't discount why those people want that label, right? Same thing with pronouns, an easy example that we can all understand, right? Using the right pronoun for somebody, that's a big deal, right? You need to understand why that's a big deal, and why it's so personal for people when you mispronounce or use the wrong pronoun for that person, right? Misgendering, same thing. So I think it's all about education. And so use your social media tools for the right reason, which is to educate people, right? And that's what I try to do by putting out these things, is let's educate people. Let's not assume people know why we should use BIPOC versus people of color. Let's educate people on these things.
That's wonderful. Now, we discussed, and I've heard other interviews that you've done, and you say that you have these 8 key words. I see you, I hear you, you matter. How are you incorporating, because those 8 words are very, very powerful. Mm-hmm. Are they resonating in corporate America?
Yeah, I think that we are at a tipping point right now, when it comes to those words. I think everybody's under a microscope, and everybody is a leader, every single one of us. And so I use those words a lot, because I think really at the end of the day, that's what we all want. We want to be seen. We want to be valued. We want to feel like we matter, right? And so I take those terms into my trainings to corporate America by educating people on civility being the core value, that regardless of our differences, regardless of our experiences, we are going to treat each other with dignity and respect. And we're going to have differences. And then when we do, that we, especially in those moments where there's a distance between us, where there's a disagreement, a misunderstanding, we're not seeing eye to eye, especially in those moments, we have to commit, to treating each other with dignity and respect, especially in those moments. And that's how we're going to bring those words into corporate America. That's how we're going to bring that into our communities. And we have to take accountability for our own actions. I think that's so important. No amount of training or lawyers or HR is going to fix it unless the people within that organization are inspired. They want to be a part of the solution. They are empowered with the right tools, and that you trust your people, right? You create an environment of psychological safety to trust them to have these conversations and to be able to deal with some of these issues. And how do we resolve conflict? We need to teach people that. We don't know that. We can't assume that we all know, right? I joke around, and if you've listened to my stuff, I say, you don't want me to resolve conflict the way my parents did at home, right? I had to learn better approaches, and I'm still learning, as I do this work. So think about how we empower ourselves and each other to be a part of that solution, to bring those words to the corporate.
And that is a great way to wrap this up. So we're just about out of time. I want to thank Sejal again. This has just been tremendous. Your story and how you've morphed and evolved, and what you're doing is critical. We're not going to survive if we do not get back to civility. So, ladies and gentlemen, no matter what life throws at you, and as you heard today, it's going to throw a lot at you, please do 3 things. Look up, get up, never, ever give up. Pick up the pieces and start moving forward. And better people like Sejal will come into your life. It happens. If you'd like more information about Sejal, you can contact me or go to her websites. And if you come to me, I'll make sure it gets to her. You can see this show on Roku TV or on my YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube, please subscribe. I will also send a copy of this, a link to Sejal, and she'll put it at all the places that she puts out all of her information. Now, let me leave you with this, ladies and gentlemen. None of us are in this alone. And the secret to walking on water is to know where the rocks are. And today, Sejal showed us where many of those rocks are. Join me again next week. We'll discuss another life-altering event. Thank you.